3rd, 2022 meeting of the Rolesville Planning Board to order. Welcome, everybody. Interesting agenda for the evening. It's not often that the Parks and Rec Director gets to join us and get to see his shining face. First item on the agenda, as usual, is the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this point, I would ask everybody to stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Give Commissioner Medley a moment to Mr. Moss, if once again you could honor us.
Okay. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight and gather and meet on behalf of the town. We'd like to ask for your blessing over this meeting, and we'd also like for your guidance and direction in the decisions we make. For may everything we say and do be in your honor. Amen.
Item 3 is review and approval of the minutes from our meeting on May 23rd.
Mr. Chairman, having read the minutes and hearing no corrections, I make a motion we approve them.
We have a motion for approval with no corrections. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. All those in favor, please give me an aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? It is unanimous. The minutes are approved. Which brings us to more of the meat of the evening. Regular agenda item number 1 is presentation from the Greenway plan and bike plan. And JG, I believe the podium is yours for this one.
Good evening, Planning Board. I know it's been a while since I've been up here before you, so I appreciate you taking the time. Just a quick background, the town of Roseville is wrapping up the completion of our bike plan, which is funded through NCDOT, and also our Greenway master plan as well. So what we're looking for tonight is either recommendation for approval or some comments that we need to correct on the plan. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board has already made a recommendation for approval to Town Board. Before we get started, did anyone watch last Tuesday's night's meeting of the same presentation? No? All right. Good. Commissioner Medley, I'm sorry. So I'm going to get started. I will start with the Roseville Bike Plan. Again, this is funded through NCDOT. So there's a lot of things. We had to check some boxes for DOT for that grant funding for this project. One of the things that's really important as we go through the bike plan is once this plan is adopted with NCDOT's new policy of complete streets, if there's a DOT street where it shows where there's side path or a greenway or something, or bike lanes along that section, when DOT makes improvements to that section of the road, they will make those improvements at their cost as well. So that's a great, even more incentive for us to make sure we get these plans right and get them approved and adopted by the town of Roseville. So again, tonight we're just going to do a quick overview of the project, the Roseville Bikes plan, and the Greenway plan as well. And we'll really talk about the priority projects. Is probably the biggest piece that I'll talk about during this presentation. So again, as you can see here at the very last slide, we're in the implementation and final plan. And this is where we are coming for adoption now. So this has been a little over a year in the making. We've had numerous public interactions via steering committees, open houses, and we even had a pop-up at the Fall Fun Fest to gather public input as well. Our last public input session, we had a hybrid. It was both you could Zoom in for the meeting or come in person, so we had a pretty good turnout for that. Those on Zoom had the same opportunities through the open house to go to a concept board and write their comments on the plans as well. So we want to make sure we incorporated all of the public feedback through this whole, for the last year during this whole planning processing. So the Roseville recommendations, and I'll try to zoom into these screens. This font's pretty small in some of this. So we're going to start with the network recommendations. Right here, you'll see both plans side by side. Oops. It's not letting me zoom. So both plans, with the bike plan, DOT also wants to show all modes of transportation for cycling. And so we also show side paths and greenways as part of the plan on the bike plan. On the left side, all the blue lines, those are all bike lanes that are on existing or future roads through the town of Rolesville, or in the Roseville ETJ. There's several network recommendations. A lot of the recommendations, you're going to see a lot of majority will be bike lanes, and there'll also be some side paths in section as well. And we'll go through those top 10 recommendations here in a moment. So network recommendations, again, we have priority projects, and the top 10 priority projects is what we're getting ready to kind of roll through next. Main Street bike lanes, and I apologize, I was able to, let me try something different. There we go. So here's an example of the recommendation for Main Street. As you know, the town should open bids, I believe it's tomorrow, for the LAP funding or the project that's for the Main Street. There are bike lanes in that design, so we took that into account. The only addition language in this for Main Street would be the your PVC pole that goes in between. It'd be right in this section here. It'd be for your travel lane and your bike lane. That help give that extra barrier of protection for cyclists. That's really the only recommendation in addition to what's going to be going on Main Street in the next couple of years for that construction project. And again, over here on this side, you can see we're 5-foot bike lane, 2-foot buffer, and then 11-foot travel lanes. The next recommendation would be the Young Street side path. An example, and again, let me make sure, the town just completed the transportation plan and planning, town staff and planning, and this board here also, if you remember, the transportation plan was in 2021 it was adopted. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We took a lot of language that came out of that planning efforts, and we want to make sure we incorporated it in this as well. But you just went through the whole public engagement and vetted all of those policies. So we wanted to kind of build upon those. So this right here, the proposed facility rendering, that is right in front of the high school. So you can see on the high school side of Roseville Road, you would have the side path in addition to the bike lanes on either side as well. One of the things we heard through our surveying is they would like to see students with the ability to safely bike to school. And so that's one of those recommendations that we want to make sure we got in there as well. The third one is Granite Falls Boulevard. The recommendation from this plan is to have bike lanes. Let me show you again. 5-foot bike lanes, 2-foot dividers, 11-foot travel lanes. We can stay within the existing curb to achieve this as well. There's also an alternative to this. There have been some conversations about wanting on-street parking as permanent dedicated on-street parking. So there is an alternative to this proposal as well. And in that you would have on Granite Falls on Granite Falls Swim Club side would be on-street parking and a Sharrow bike lane. A Sharrow bike lane is markings on the street and the cyclist would travel with traffic. On the Sanford Creek Elementary School side would have a dedicated 5-foot bike lane on that side. I don't have an example of that to show, but I think as we get down a little bit later, I can show you again what it would be. So essentially, this side of the street here, this bike lane would be over here with the traffic. It would travel with cars, and then this would be your 8 feet would be on-street parking. So that was the I think last Tuesday night, that was kind of one of the conversations that was had. We spent most time was kind of talking about that and what those scenarios would be. The next section would be Rogers Road. That would incorporate a side path and a bike lane. Zoom in down here, and as again, you can see you got your 5-foot bike lane, a buffer, 1.5 feet, 11 foot travel lanes in both directions, to 4 total lanes, another bike lane, and then a 10-foot side path. Burlington Mills Road, side path and bike lanes. Here's an exhibit in front of Rolesville Middle School. Same scenarios we just talked about. 5-foot bike lanes, 11-foot travel lanes, 5-foot bike lanes, and a 10-foot side path. Again, it's in front of the middle school. It kind of gives you an example of what that would look like. Number 6 is Redford Place Drive bike lanes. Again, this is all staying within the existing curb. 5-foot, 2-foot buffer, 11-foot travel lanes on both sides. And here's an example of what that actually would look like with bike lanes. Averitt Road and West Young Street, side paths and bike lanes. Seeing a common theme here. This is your 10-foot side path, 5-foot bikes, 11-foot travel lanes. And again, a lot of this stuff, when you're seeing 4 lanes here, that's pulling information from the transportation plan. Then we have the Roseville Road bike lanes. Again, we're going to our standard 5-foot, 2-foot buffer, 11-foot travel. Another concept is bicycle boulevards. These are more in your neighborhoods. These would be another Shero type road or markings on the street. So these are like your Carlton Point through the villages. Think about Virginia Water Drive, connecting all the way through from Jones Dairy all the way to Cedar Lakes. So that's kind of what these bike boulevards are looking at here. And again, here's what that Shero markings would actually is your bicycle with your 2 lines. That means the bicyclists are sharing your travel lane. It also have additional signage along the side of the streets through these neighborhoods as well, identifying that there's bikes on the street. Again, it's just trying to provide another mode of transportation in a safe manner, alternative to just using our vehicles. And our 10th recommendation is the same concept through the Granite Falls neighborhood, the boulevards. And again, here's an example of what your street markings would be like with your Sheros. So then we kind of get into programs and policies. So we really kind of went through and what do we stand, establishing wayfinding standards for bicycle plan, potentially establishing a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee, or expand the role of the Open Space and Greenway Committee. Expand the complete street policy in the LDO to require implementation of on-road bicycle facilities. Reduce town-wide speed limit to 25 miles per hour. Currently in town, all town streets right now are 25 miles per hour. It may be something as a simple text change that we move where current code says 35, but in reality, town-controlled streets are all 25. The ones that are not are DOT roads. So we already checked that box unofficially. And again, expand design standards in the LDO. We want to make sure Meredith comes with you at least 7-8 rounds of LDO recommendations. Implement single detection for bicyclists at signalized intersections. Again, just more of safety precautions to help these cyclists get through town. And then implementation. What partners are in this together? You have NCDOT, the town of Roseville, and we also have regional partners. DOT is pretty self-explanatory. Regional partners are Campo, Wake County, Franklin County, Wake Forest, Raleigh, et cetera. Town of Roseville is your town board, town staffs, your residents, and either bike committee and or open space and greenway committees, a combination of those two. Then we talk about the roles of each partner throughout the plan, in this section of the plan as well. And then we have our action plans of what do we need to do to help achieve these averages. As you see, all these basically your goals of the plan to help hold us accountable to make sure we're moving forward and implementing this new bike plan as well. So that is it on the bike plan. Again, this was a DOT funded project, so we had to make sure we checked all the boxes that they need for that plan as well. So if you have any questions on the bike plan, I could take those at this time.
On the, along the Burlington Mills and Roseville Road section in front of the school, I know those roads have already been widened a little bit with center turn lanes, and there's currently a sidewalk on the school side. Would the town be stepping in to upgrade those, or would we be waiting for DOT to make some eventual widenings? How would they get to what the plan shows now from where they are?
Right, that's great. I would believe it would really be dependent on development to really implement a lot of these changes. Would be DOT, whether you're coming into a road widening, or developments would come in that would force the road widening themselves. I wouldn't see a lot of town initiative projects initially in the next, 3 to 5 years. I wouldn't see a town doing a lot of these big projects. We may be doing the street markings and things like the low hanging fruit that we can hit, the bike share lanes, the bike boulevards, those kind of projects. But going in and doing full on road construction, I just don't see we're financially there. If you look at our 5-year CIP plan, we're pretty much have it maxed out in the next 5 years of projects currently. And we do have budget numbers along with all of these projects. We used NCDOT's estimator tool to help get these funding costs, and so they're all big ticket items.
And the reason I brought those up, so I know like the schools, their development's done, and like at the high school, there's already I think plan approved for subdivision across the street from that. So it's like we kind of missed our boat for any development. So I guess we're just at a waiting game on that one.
I believe so, and I think you'll see a lot of those scenarios even down Averitt Road. There's already a lot of developments already approved, where if this was in place 2-3 years ago, they would have to do a lot more infrastructure than what they're currently having to do. So it's one of those things where I wish we could have had it, but we didn't. So now we're preparing for the next round of expansion.
One more question. On Granite Falls, where you were showing the bike lanes being incorporated in with the existing footprint, so that's more of a striping exercise to get those bike lanes in?
Correct.
What
Yes, sir.
happens, like at the entrance to the Sanford Creek where they had the center turn lane now, and that is that going to go away, or that become one of those shallow lanes in that area?
So we've already eliminated the turn lane on Granite Falls Boulevard when we did the restriping project, when we completed the extension of Granite Falls Boulevard. So there's currently 2 bike lanes now on either side, but there have been some on-street parking that occurs during big events for Granite Falls currently in the bike lane. So now that's why this conversation is really coming up now is there any parking in bike lanes? And if so, we need to make sure it's a safe movement. So do we need to leave on-street parking and have a Sharrow lane for that side of traffic going from Young to Rogers? Or do we make it dedicated bike lane and there's no on-street parking? So the plan recommends no on-street parking, but we do know that's a conversation for discussions. That's why we have an alternative plan in there. But you're correct. It would just be a restriping again of burning out the bike lanes and moving them over to and restriping as Sharrows in the travel lane if that was something we wanted to do.
That's it.
Thank you. All right. We'll jump into the Greenway plan. Again, the same premise here. I'm going to really touch on our recommendations, and then what we're also going to kind of touch on is more of our maintenance, and then what of our standards. That's something that one of our key takeaways. We want to have a standard, so when developers comes like this is the town of Roseville standard, and we're going to get to where we got a spec sheet as well, a design standard, so we can say here it is, which is typically your 10-foot paved greenway, 2-foot shoulders, boardwalks, tunnels, kind of addressing all of those metrics that we'll see in Rolesville as we continue to develop. We are fortunate the majority of our greenways are developer built, so we do save a lot of money as a town having these developers include these greenways throughout their developments, which we know enhances their developments and makes them more more pleasing to citizens. And we know greenways are very popular, so that does help them also through their marketing efforts, but it also helps us complete our greenway system. By combining these two plans, also, let me back up 1 second, we were able to save some money because we're only doing one surveying, we're only doing one demographics of the town and a lot of that. So we actually do have three feasibility studies of future greenways that the town will have to construct. So we have those cost estimates as well as part of this project. So we actually get a little bit more bang for our buck by combining these two projects together as well. And I'll talk about those towards the end. So again, we talked about our typical sections, there's a couple of different ideas for boardwalks. You have concrete deck boardwalks. You see those a lot now, and Wake Forest that's kind of like their new standard. We currently still allow boardwalk sections in Rolesville, so that's kind of what you see here. So that's, again, what are those definite standards that we want to move towards, and that's that next phase. After we adopt this plan, then the town will come together. What exactly are our standards, and what do we want to put in place for those? Again, our preferred greenway is going to be 10-foot wide trail. Pavement is our first priority with 2-foot graded shoulders on either side. There is also, we understand there are some areas that are constrained, and you could go down to as narrow as 8 foot, but again, we would want to make sure we go through every effort possible to make sure they're 10 foot and paved. It also leaves an option in here for natural surface as well. Again, just showing a typical section for what a boardwalk section would look like. And then we also talk about side paths, typical sections with your side path and then your buffer and then your travel lanes as well. And here's an example. This one's in Chapel Hill, where you have your buffer, and then you have your greenway or your side path running parallel to your street. We also talked about in the recommendations our intersection treatments and crossings. We really want to make sure we improve those, especially for greenways that are going across streets, especially major corridors through town. So we kind of talk about what are some options. If you may have noticed, some of ours that we started doing, we have some on Main Street now at crossings where we have the push button activated. There's solar power for that rapid beacon to help pedestrians get across the street. We have those on Young Street and also Granite Falls Boulevard currently. So as we expand our network and we have these crossings, this will be another standard that we'll most likely start requiring when we build these greenways, when we have this high volume street crossings. If it's an internal neighborhood crossing, most likely it would just be either your high vis or just your standard double line for your pedestrians. But if there's a high volume, we'd also want to make this rapid beacon as a part of our standard. Here we're talking about, again, our bridges. These are more of your bridges versus just your boardwalks. And then on the right, we have tunnel use. You may or may not know, we currently have 4 tunnels underneath US 401 bypass that connects us to the other side. The point will be our first connectivity that we'll go through when they come through, we'll have through the Cedar Lakes is where it'll make that connectivity to. So if you can kind of think of where the point north is, there's a culvert right there. They're the first development that's actually going to touch that, and they are already have the designs to build that up to the property line of Cedar Lakes. So we're excited about making that first connectivity. I don't know if you go back to the early 2000s, maybe the 90s, the vision of the advisory boards and town boards at that time to help get DOT to put those culverts, it's actually coming to a reality now. So we're excited about that. There's another, the far north one is at the farm property. That's right there at the lakes of Roseville. There's one right there as well. And there's another one at Cedar Creek, also just south of that. And then the fourth one is Harris Creek as well. So there's our 4 connection points with those culverts that's currently existing. So now we're going to get into the Greenway network recommendations. And these recommendations here are, again, for the intersections treatments. As you can see, there's a lot of those listed on here. And again, those are high traffic areas if you've kind of noticed where they're at so far. Young Street, Main Street, Rogers, Heritage East. Again, these are all high traffic crossings. And then we get into our network priority projects. So our priority projects that came out of surveying and dealing with future connectivities that we know of is Heritage East connection that comes out of Heritage Gates, crosses Rogers Road. That's one of our feasibilities that we actually had McAdams dig deep into, and so I'll talk about that in a little more in depth in a few moments. Our Harris Creek Greenway, Granite Falls Boulevard side path. I'll dig into that one a little bit as a feasibility. East Young Street side path, Main Street side path, Rogers Road side path, Burlington Mills Road side path, Heritage East and Chalk Road connectivity, and that would be where Jones Dairy Preserve South connects down to Chalk Road. Heritage Place Park, Young Street, Greenway connector, that will go through the new town-owned property, eventually take you to Town Hall from one municipal site to another. Redford Place Park Greenway, and Averett Road side path. So those are the top 10 Greenway network projects for priorities. Now I'm going to jump into when I talk about our feasibility projects. We have the Heritage East Millbridge Park Greenway connection, and that's where we get across Rogers Road. We have Granite Falls Boulevard side path. That takes us essentially what will take from Main Street Park to almost Rolesville Middle School at the new intersection of Burlington Mills Road for future connectivity with those greenways that come in. And also will get to tie you into the Toms Creek Greenway. And the Harris Creek Greenway. This is the portion I was just mentioning with the point. The Point Greenway will stop right here. The town will be responsible for making that connection to the Parker property that is right here at the northern point. Back in the early 2000s, the town board only required easements for greenways, and that was all that was required. So we're catching up with that now, where the town will be responsible for constructing those greenways. So that's why I was wanting to do a feasibility of this section. We know there's been talk of a future development on the Parker property. So we wanted to make sure we did our due diligence as a staff, knowing that the point's coming. There's another one to the north on the Parker. There's going to be a missing gap. And we know that would be our responsibility. So that's why we wanted to go ahead and take advantage of that now. So I'm going to start with the Heritage East and Millbridge Nature Park connection. This is a very unique project. Town staff has been working with NCDOT for probably the last 3 or 4 years to at least allow us to put rapid beacons for help crossing right here. DOT has told us that they don't recommend that crossing, and they want to see us move it down further and do maybe like a safe haven in the middle of Rogers Road, because they would not approve. And there's existing crosswalks there. It's already striped through NCDOT. Today's standards NCDOT, they would not allow a crossing there at a 4-way intersection that's not signalized. So they will not allow us to at least interimly improve the crossing. They want to see something else come through. McAdams spent a lot of time talking with NCDOT. If you move, they're traditionally 300 feet down, roughly where 1E is. Those of you that know this section of Rogers Road know that's not a very safe spot either, as you're coming up the hill and in a curve. So that's not very safe either. So DOT has come back in the recommendation, and DOT is safe as of right now, telling us that the safest crossing is at the existing intersection, and a hawk lighting would be what they would want there. And a hawk lighting is basically what comes up and across, and you push button activated, and it puts up a red light. It's almost like a signal light for pedestrians, is the best way to kind of describe that. You see it similar with fire departments sometimes on busy intersections. So we had so McAdams looked at several different options. You can see 1C going down, following the creek, and then coming back up. 1D staying on the south side of the creek. 1E running parallel, and then trying to go underneath, go over top. But you know there's a lot of rock right there as well. So that crossing was just not feasible financially to make either fly it or go under it. So the recommendation is 1G to 1F would be the recommendation. The 1F would be increasing that sidewalk to a side path. And the same thing with 1G, increasing the sidewalk on Heritage Gates Drive into a side path to give you your 10-foot connectivity all the way through the existing Greenway and Heritage, running through Heritage East. Again, they also did cost estimates using NCDOT's cost estimator. So a quick snapshot of this one here. The recommendations would be around $470,000 for that recommendation. And here is an example of what the side path, as you can see, it would be very tight along Rogers Road, but the sidewalk currently goes to the curb as well right through there. The next feasibility, this was the one through Cedar Lakes. This one is a very tricky project, and the timing, I kind of drug my feet a little bit, and luckily the developers of Cedar Lakes has worked with me. Again, this goes back to early 2000s in Cedar Lakes. The Greenway easement was never recorded when everything was done in the early 2000s, so we're going back, and we had just a couple permits enough left that we can still get the final plat re-recorded with easements on there, so we're working with those developers right now. So this is almost perfect timing to make sure we actually get the easements right, so when we are ready to construct, we have it in the correct spots. The 2C segment you see right here, this will be on the Cedar Lakes HOA property. 2D would be on the Village of Roseville's open space easement. Kind of give you a quick background on that. Same issue we had with Cedar Lakes. The Villages was no recorded easements that we can find either, so we'll have to go back through the HOA to get those easements now. With McAdams looking at both options, 2C obviously would be the easiest for staff, not having to go through an HOA to get easements. It's almost twice the cost as it is to do 2D and 2B. It's a little over $2 million to go, let me zoom out just a little bit, from 2D following this. I'm sorry, for 2C. If we go 2C, go up to the street level, down the street via the sidewalk system, and then cross down to 2E, back across into 2A. That's 3 stream crossings. You're looking at roughly, I think it was like 2.1, 2.2 million for that section. 2D and 2E to allow these residents access to the Greenway, and 2B is roughly 1.1 million. And that's the recommended path from this feasibility study. 2D and 2E, we will have to make sure we get the easements through the Village's HOA. And then 2B is on Cedar Lake, so we can get that recorded now with them. We are fortunate, there's a big topo. If you've ever been out there, there's a huge drop off Virginia Water Drive down. And through our feasibility study, we've realized that we can actually go through the existing tunnel that goes underneath Virginia Water Drive. That's why our cost is half, because we're not having to build boardwalks to get up 20, 30 feet. And again, we're trying to do our best to be ADA compliant, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty good fly. So we do have enough distance where the stream is and the size of the culvert, so we can actually go on the left side here and go through the culvert underneath Virginia Water Drive with the Greenway system. And then our final recommendations, or the feasibility we studied, was the Granite Falls Boulevard section. We looked at several different paths. We looked at 3A, which would be on the swim club side as a side path. As you can see right here between Anna Point Lane and the swim club, the way the train falls, we'd actually have to put in a bridge right there as well. 3B was another alternative we looked at as a side path running along Granite Falls Boulevard. And 3C cutting through the existing property that's undeveloped. The recommendation from this project was 3B due to the constraints of this property, either the rock or the terrain and stream crossings. 3B was the most feasible option of the two As you can see, 3C was around 567,000. 3B was 284,000. So that's why you see a side path running along Granite Falls Boulevard as the preferred option. As we get down, again, we would then follow 4B, and 4D would be our, 4B would be our recommendation as well. As you can see, these little jog outs here, these are going around fire hydrants. We would not have to move any utilities. If we followed 4A, we would have to relocate all the street light posts. They're on this side of the street, and we would have to relocate all of those. So the cost of that doesn't offset keeping it on the 4B side. So again, if you think about it, we're still on the same side of the road on Granite Falls Boulevard, making our crossing at a signal light, coming down. Then at Grand Rock Way, we then recommend going crossing here and then following 4C, which is on the other side. And now as I move down to my next sheet, you'll see the 5A would be the preferred section of Granite Falls Boulevard. And the reason we do that is then our future connectivity to the Toms Creek or back into the Walbrook development would keep everyone on the same side of the street, so we don't have to take pedestrians and cross them across travel. So that was our last feasibility for that project as well. And to do all of those, I think it was around 1.4 million to make all those improvements. And again, as back to Mr. Powers' point, or Mr. Moss, I apologize, one of the two. A lot of that was just constructed, right? Granite Falls Boulevard is in 5-foot sidewalks on either side. So the likelihood of coming in, and then the town, those are town streets, so the town would be responsible for doing all those improvements. When does that come? I'm not sure on the big picture of town priorities, but that we wanted to make sure we addressed it because that was one, Greenway, kind of like a loop of town, that was a big portion, big section of that, so we wanted to make sure we could address that. Moving along again, some more recommendations that we didn't do feasibilities was the Main Street side path. And that's really more of your northern section, right, taking you up towards the farm. The Heritage East and Chalk Road connector, as we know, the Jones Dairy Preserve will make a connectivity down to Chalk Road. And then as potentially more development on the other side of Chalk Road, which is adjacent to Heritage East, we would then tie in the Greenway system back in down towards Heritage East and make that tie in to get folks back into town. And then Redford Place Park, Young Street connector. Again, that's taking you from Redford Place Park over towards the future Town Hall campus and Young Street. And then the Redford Place Park Greenway, that Greenway is basically running along Redford Place Drive back through the easement that wasn't recorded all the way back towards the Wall Creek Pocket Park for make that, again, to finish out that loop back into Walbrook. And then again, the connectivity up to Burlington Mills Road. And then you kind of see that vision of the loop, of the Greenway loop around town. So again, then we have our recommended policies for trails maintenance. You know, as we continue to grow, we want to be more proactive than reactive in our trail system. So this is kind of laying out some standards for us. Talks about the LDO expansion. Being the LDO was just done, there's a lot of stuff in the LDO about greenways and open space. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, maybe just a little bit of tweaks here and there to help us through the development process. And then wayfinding, as you may know, we do have wayfinding now. It's here. This picture here is our wayfinding branding that we have. So we're incorporating that along with all of our greenways to help folks who are wayfinding. And then we need to look into trailhead signings and getting standards for those. But this is a new standard that developers do get. So when their greenways come in, they install these signs as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Before we move on. So on these wayfindings, is there a way, I just thought of it. As you know, wellness, safety, and security of our community and our residents are always one of my top is there a way to install a security system? Not cameras, buttons that you can press so that our local officials can know where these if someone is in distress, heart attack, health issues, whatever they may be, they may not be able to, or someone may not be able to describe where they are if they're especially in the park somewhere. Is there a way to have someone like have a mile marker, right? You know, on a highway, you have a mile marker where an accident's been, so you can give precise. I basically wanted to create some sort of a quick response system.
Right.
Is there something like that?
So as we're going into the wayfinding, the trailheads, mile markers, that is something that's in there. If you know, Wake Forest does have that existing now along there.
Okay.
They do have markers. That's our next step. And along with trailhead identifiers would be those wayfinding markers or identifiers.
Right.
You know, the push buttons for, like you see, like a lot on campuses and things like that.
Campuses, yes.
They're just not financially,
I see.
you know, you're thinking about, a lot of times you're out in the woods along creeks, and just to get power down there to them, it's just not feasible to make those possible. We are in a time now where most folks do have access to cell phones. Right, so those mile markers, and then, you know, you're at Sanford Creek Greenway 2.3 or something like that, and it just kind of helps them identify what's that last marker they saw. Yes, sir.
Good.
That is something that's not something we're ready to implement, but it's something that we're thinking about and trying to process what those would look like and how do we implement those through our system as well.
Got it. Good.
Yep.
Solid.
And then we jump in, we kind of finish up here with the implementation. Same process as the bike plan. It gives us kind of those goals and action plans on what to do and how do we get there. And so we have a lot of, you know, goals ahead of us that we want to maintain and to capture. And then finally, you know, we talked about that maintenance piece, and it's really trying to be more proactive than reactive and maintaining a good Greenway system and finding the dedicated funding that we always put aside to upgrade the trail system as well. Because there's just like any street that you have, there's asphalt, there's tree roots, there's always going to be maintenance. So we want to make sure we stay ahead of it moving forward. So our next steps, again, we have been through a presentation last Tuesday night to town board, basically the same one. I did this also last week, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. They did make a recommendation for adoption. Our plan, if this board so sees fit to make a recommendation of approval, would then go to town board on August, the first board meeting in August, the town board, have a public hearing so we can adopt it. I think it's 160D, kind of makes us make sure we check all those boxes to make sure we're compliant. I mean, these are some land action plans. Did I say that right, Meredith? Close enough? Close enough. Okay.
I had two questions for you, JG. Going as more back in the beginning of the Greenway section, you mentioned there was an alternative for narrower widths under special circumstances. Who makes that decision when the developer comes up and says they don't have enough room? Is that you, or is that the Parks and Greenway Committee planning? Who does that?
So we do run a lot of the TRC review does go through the Open Space Greenway. They do get to take a look at that also, and then staff also would review it as well. And as Mike knows, we have a lot of conversations with developers to make sure that we're doing what's best for the citizens of Rolesville, making that connectivity. So if there's an alternative that they can work it in there, we will try to make sure that we're exhausting all options before we settle on less than what our standards.
Okay. And then you were mentioning coming up with some standards details for bridges and boardwalks. Is there any means in there for if a developer comes up with something newer or different than, you know, if you adopt wooden greenways and concrete, if somebody comes up with something that they think's better, is there provisions for allowing something that may be new or may come out after this ordinance is in place?
That's something we can look into. Obviously, it would be an adopted standard, so that's what we would have to follow. If it is something we could do our research and do better, would go back before probably this board and town board to make those changes to those standards.
Okay.
Questions, comments?
question. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Quick question, actually, if that's all right. You mentioned the hawk lighting.
Yes, sir.
Hawk lighting. What? How does that work?
It's similar. Let me see if I can go up and find it so I can give you
It
the
was
exact
off of-
definition. It's a push
Right in front of the
button.
Main Street Park, on Main Street. The push button, ideally, it would be over the, I've seen big ones that go over the road where the lights start flashing at you, but some, the ones we have just flash at the side of the road.
The side of the road, okay.
So the Hawk lighting would be, as Mr. Powers just mentioned, would be up and above, so the car seeing would see it visually.
So it would be more visible?
Yes, sir.
I see that on Main Street, right in front of the elementary school. Is there any way, it's so conspicuous, or inconspicuous, I should say, very difficult to see at times, especially with high travel? And again, this might be off topic, sorry.
No,
Is
no
there
worries.
any way to make that either bigger, more overhead, or instead of using, I believe it's an orange and white, make it a red and blue light, so it actually gets your attention to stop and slow down when there's someone there? I pick up my kids there from that bus stop, and I see children and pedestrians trying to cross that road, and cars don't stop because they're probably just not familiar with it, or it's just not in your, really grabs you visually. I don't know if that's a recommendation or it's just a suggestion. Could we do
Right.
something about that?
So those are NCDOT roads, and so we
Oh.
had to get their approval for what is there. The town actually installed those. So we had to go get an encroachment easement from DOT, send them the specs of everything that was, and get it spec'd out. I know exactly what you're talking about. If you're traveling north, there's a power pole.
Yes.
Right behind it, so it makes it kind of tough to blend in. That's the closest we could get to that crosswalk with that one. Again, it's maybe a foot, median between the sidewalk and the road. We're very limited. What we get is would
I
either
see.
be in the sidewalk or it'd be in the street. So we're very limited on what size we can put there
Gotcha.
with the exert. And it may be something with the Main Street, we can look in to see if there's something, a better option that we can
Yeah.
do.
I tell you what, when we see blue lights and red lights flashing, I tell you, somehow slow down for some reason. But orange and white, that's just more of a caution to slow down. Just a thought. But okay, no, thank you so much. I didn't know what all the details that went into that.
Yeah, so that's a DOT spec sign that we have to put in. And I think the blue and the red, I don't know if we can even use those because of,
Right.
public safety. That's
They're-
something I'm not aware or sure what we can do with the different color lights. But again, it goes back to your point, it's more of education. Most people don't understand when pedestrians have the right of way, when those lights are blinking, they're supposed to stop
Stop,
and
yep.
and allow pedestrians to cross. But it's more of an educational thing that we can maybe look into, do some more, especially on our social media.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
And I guess you need a recommendation from us?
I would prefer it, yes, sir. Yes, we have to have it, yes, sir. Meredith gives me the nod.
No more questions, I'd be interested in making a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
So I recommend that we approve the updated bicycle plan and Greenway plan as presented.
We have a motion for recommendation of approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please give me an eye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Once again, we're unanimous.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. Good to see everyone again. How about that?
Next up is presentation on LDO text amendments. Take 3.
Yes. Third time's a charm, maybe. So, good evening. This is the introduction to our third round of technical amendments for our land development ordinance. I first introduced them at the town board work session last Tuesday. So this is your introduction, and then this is to help us prepare for the July 25th meeting, where staff will have the amendments drafted, and in your report that you'll review in advance of that meeting, you'll get into the meat of those text changes and help us craft those to be as good as possible. You all did a wonderful job with rounds 1 and 2. I remember getting some great markups, and it helped a lot. And I know at the town board work session, several commissioners mentioned they were looking forward to you all diving into these amendments and helping with them and helping figure things out. So it should be fun. The first 4 amendments were discussed at your joint work session back in March, the joint work session with the town board. First, we talked about our traffic impact analysis threshold. Right now, the LDO has the threshold set at 100 or more peak hour trips or 1,000 trips in a 24-hour period. And I do better with a number of units and floor space instead of trips. 100 trips is close enough to 100 residential units or about 25,000 square feet of commercial space, if that helps you visualize what that trigger point is. So we've seen multiple subdivision plans come through over the past year where there might have been 60 homes, 80 homes, and they didn't meet the threshold for a full traffic impact analysis. And I know that caused a lot of questions and concerns. So staff's recommendation is to reduce that threshold in half and require a traffic impact analysis for 50 or more peak hour trips or 500 trips in a 24-hour period. We also looked at the city of Concord. They have a tiered approach. So for cases where there are less than 50 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips, I think we should also consider requiring an access, location, and design review. It's sort of like a miniature traffic impact analysis. That means we'll always have something for any kind of development that's in front of you to make a recommendation on. The next item we previously discussed was connectivity. Right now, our land development ordinance is somewhat vague on required connections. It states that a subdivision will provide multiple routes for pedestrian and vehicle trips. So multiple means more than one, but I'm not sure how many more. So to clarify that, staff is recommending that we put into the LDO connect to existing street stubs, implement access points as recommended by the traffic impact analysis report, and make pedestrian connections wherever possible. We also talked about streetlight poles at the joint work session, and we've had cases recently where some developers wanted to put in wooden street poles. You're smiling. And we'd prefer not to see those. We'd like to put in the LDO that the streetlights need to be decorative. The fourth item we talked about a bit before, but really haven't gotten into a lot of detail, has to do with the evidentiary processes. What you all see as the planning board are our legislative processes. Those are our rezonings and our land development ordinance amendments. And those have a little more creativity, may not be the right word, subjectivity involved. You can make suggestions on conditions and craft things and have a little more flexibility in how things turn out. With evidentiary processes or quasi-judicial hearings, things are based on findings of fact, and it's harder for the town board to deny something that doesn't work for the community, because if a lawyer for that case presents evidence that demonstrates compliance with the findings of fact, it needs to be approved. Or there could be lawsuits and uncomfortable things. So, as I mentioned, the planning board is used to deals with our legislative items, and the town board also sees those, but the town board's also seen our evidentiary processes. And examples of those are appeals, variances, those are go to the Board of Adjustment right now, and the town board has seen our special use permits, our major subdivision preliminary plats, and the site plans that don't have, that have conditional zoning or some other design variance involved. If something is straight zoning, it can go to site plan that is administratively approved, meaning it's approved by town staff. So several months ago, the mayor mentioned considering sending some of these evidentiary items to the Board of Adjustment instead of the town board keeping them. And I'm haven't gotten clear direction yet from the town board if they want to do that or not. They seem interested in trying something, and I'm not sure if we should send the 3 items that are listed here under Town Board of Commissioners to the Board of Adjustment, or if we want to divide them into 2 categories, maybe minor subdivision preliminary plats, things that have less than a certain number of units, and then major subdivision plats over a certain number of units would stay with the town board. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on that or would like to digest it and be prepared to review whatever we put together for the next meeting. I don't know if you've watched any of those evidentiary hearings, if you're tuning into a town board meeting.
I think a lot of it's going to depend on what the town board's comfortable with, really. I just logistically and on the policy front, I could see them maybe handing off the major subdivision plats to the Board of Adjustment, but they might not want to let loose of the special use permits or the site plans. But again, really, I know it's a big time sink for them. So it's really the way we are right now, it's kind of a balancing act. What are they comfortable with?
I didn't get clear direction at the work session. One conversation I'd had before made it sound like they're ready to send it all away, and then the next conversation, it felt like they weren't quite ready.
Yeah.
I just was told to explore it, and I know they value your opinion, so wanted to.
And I know that's come up several times with some commissioners and the mayor and just different conversations, but is the Board of Adjustments even defined? Is there any members that's not even defined as a board right now, is
Well,
it?
got lucky. We reached out to some of our members. The Board of Adjustment has not met since I've been on staff.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure when the last meeting was, but we reached out to the members who are still under term, and they are still interested in being part of the Board of Adjustment. So that is good news.
Yeah.
Just-
I think
go
it would
ahead.
be good if we had I guess, a clear list of tasks that we are, that could potentially be shifted to the Board of Adjustments.
Okay.
And then, like Mr. Chairman Power said, is maybe get some feedback from the commissioners as to what they would be willing to release
Okay.
decision-making abilities on.
I'm just hearing that maybe it would be helpful if I included an example of each one with some pictures, so we could jump in and be like, yes, this I want to keep this. I'm like, pass it on.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. The next batch of proposed LDO Round 3 amendments have not yet been discussed, although we've had quite a bit of discussion about townhomes or single-family attached housing. Right now, in our table of permitted principal uses, townhomes or single-family attached are only allowed in the residential high district. And we have had several proposals come in, rezoning cases, et cetera, come in over the last year where townhomes have been at a lesser density and have gotten questions from why do they have to ask for residential high? And it's because that's the only place they're allowed. So staff is recommending to also allow single-family attached in the residential medium district, and that would give a place to put townhomes at a 3 to 5 unit per acre density. And that might give some more comfort for a townhome development versus something being in a residential high district. We have several things to go through with the landscape ordinance, and this was one topic that the town board at the work session last week was definitely looking forward to you all diving in on and helping staff work through it. Doesn't necessarily have to happen tonight, but if we can just start thinking about it, that would be fantastic. First one, perimeter buffers. Right now, in our LDO, a type 1 perimeter buffer is required between lots or parcels, even of the same zoning district. For example, this is the site plan for Publix building or Walbrook buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the Publix building is at the bottom of this plan, the parking lot. You can see the shops on the top right. To the left of the Publix is a triangular-shaped lot, and then at the top left of this image are two other lots. So Walbrook would need to put perimeter buffers in these two spots based on how the LDO is written right now. So staff recommends eliminating the requirement to have a perimeter buffer between parcels of the same zoning district, because when you walk into a shopping center or drive into a shopping center, you want it to feel cohesive instead of being broken up with, a fence and landscape materials in places that, in my opinion, don't make sense. So that is that one. Street buffers, right now we require a 30-foot street buffer, just means street trees along the street on our thoroughfares. That covers a good chunk of Rolesville. Staff is recommending we add a 8 to 10-foot street buffer on local streets, so we would bring in more street trees, so when development would happen, different things going on, we'd make sure we'd have the street trees on all types of streets instead of just the major ones.
And with this, I'll go ahead. This 8 to 10 foot streetscape buffer, if we're doing a new subdivision, would that be the internal streets or just where it's abutting existing streets that aren't thoroughfares?
On the subdivision streets, we do require street trees. I'm second, it's sort of the type of street that would fall between a thoroughfare and a residential street. I would just call that a local street. We don't have a requirement in that case right now.
But it would just be an 8 to 10 foot buffer for
Just a
that?
place to put a few more trees.
Okay.
What do you think, Steve?
So if we had a new subdivision being recommended and it backed up to existing homes that are not in Roseville, but in Roseville ETJ, they would have the same zoning. Would they not be required to put that buffer up against these existing homes? If it's the same
Are
zoning?
we talking perimeter buffer or street?
Perimeter buffer.
Perimeter buffer? Yes, perimeter buffer would still be required. As a start for the perimeter buffer item, we're recommending that it just be removed in the commercial and/or non-residential districts. Let's keep it
Okay.
in the residential areas because it's a different experience in
Just wanna make
residential
sure.
versus
Okay.
commercial. So, great
Thank
question. Okay, for parking lot landscaping, the way our ordinance is written right now, you could read it that it's optional to put in terminal islands, and the islands, like this picture I have, this is not in Rolesville. It's one of my favorite examples of parking lot landscaping, though. It's a Harris Teeter in northwestern Cary. I think they've done a nice job with the pedestrian connection through the parking lot and the landscape medians there. And you can see there's a nice amount of street tree or island trees here. So in the UDO, there was a requirement that all parking spaces had to be within 60 feet of the trunk of a tree, with the intention being to get some shade in a parking lot. We don't have that requirement in the LDO, and like I said, you can read the LDO that certain types of parking lot islands and landscape areas are not required. It's just if you put them in, this is the spec to create it. So I'd like to bring back the UDO requirement to have parking spaces be within 60 feet of the trunk of a tree to make sure we're getting good shade and disbursement of islands and good parking lot design there. I guess I'm defining good parking lot design as having landscaping integrated.
Is there an example that you have of that, of one maybe that has been approved under the LDO that doesn't comply with, being 60 feet, I mean, I just can't visualize it now, but that seems
Sure.
like
Sure.
not a lot of room left for parking, considering that, spaces are pretty much 18, 19 foot deep. And if you got lanes between them, that's another 24 feet and 18 feet. So that's pretty much a row of trees between
It
all
could
the
just
parking
be,
spaces.
you know how in a parking lot, a tree island could just be created out of one parking space, and it doesn't have to be the thing that spreads throughout the entire parking bay? And I should have brought my whiteboard this time. I had a whiteboard at the town board work session I was drawing on, and I figured, I didn't think I would need it, but I could use it right now, and I could draw it for you. I'll make sure I bring a sketch of that for you.
Yeah, because I'm even envisioning now, if we had just a row of parking spaces and you establish one parking space as a tree island, then you basically aren't going to get like 6 or 7 more spots before you got to have another one.
Right, it's about every 7 to 8 spots, and I've been in other communities, worked in other communities, both in the public side and the private side, where that's been a standard. It does make for a nice parking lot, but I can bring back a sketch so you can compare what it's like with and without that, and we can see if you
I'd
think
like to
it's
see it, because I mean,
worth it.
I'm kind of envisioning, it seems like by adding all these extra tree areas, we're making the footprint of the overall parking
Mm-hmm.
lot bigger, but we're putting more trees in the middle of it, but we're taking out more trees to put
make it-
back more
Okay,
trees.
all right, that gives me an idea. Maybe we could create something where if you're saving trees along the perimeter of a lot, you don't
Maybe
have to put
creating
as many in the middle.
Maybe some offset perimeter buffers or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see some kind of example like that.
Certainly, certainly.
Or maybe the possibility of some, of like you say, an alternate to planting these
Sure.
trees.
That
All right.
that could work out well. Speaking of preserving vegetation, right now in the vegetation preservation standards, if you remove 18-inch evergreen trees and 20-inch deciduous trees, you have to replace those at a 4-to-1 ratio. And the requirement in the LDO states that, let me find, I think I have it written down here, replaced on site with at least 4 or more trees of similar species and size. I think that needs more definition. That's something we've been working on with the Walbrook developer, and they are preserving their required 10% area of trees, or they're showing that on their plans. And they did a tree survey and counted up the number of 18-inch and 20-inch trees they would be removing. And they're like, we can't fit all these trees on here, and we don't know how big to put the replacement trees in, and we're trying to figure this out. So, like, Mike and I have been working with him trying to figure out how to fit things in. We've had some other developments have similar questions. So we just would like to define that. It could be replaced at a 1-to-1 ratio, and the tree could be a larger size to make sure if we're taking big trees out, you need to put something back in that's bigger than our requirement of 2.5-inch caliber.
Is there any allowance for preservation of those 18-inch evergreen and
Oh.
20-inch preservation? Like if you save, if we're taking out a 40, but we're also saving 40, do you get any credit for those that are saved?
I like that. That's really good. No, we don't have that yet. That's a great idea. I'm going to bring you
that
on
would-
board to help with the landscape ordinance.
That's just something I've seen in another municipality.
Okay,
Um,
that's
And
very
so
helpful.
because you've got buffers and things that have to be maintained, and if you're having to leave some really larger
Big
trees in
trees.
that, at least you should
You could get to
get some
subtract
kind of credit
something
for
from
it. And
I think that's neat.
that may help with the, 4-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
But basically, like I say, if you're taking out 40 trees but you're leaving 40 at a 1-to-1 ratio, there would be no additional that would have to be replanted other than the required landscaping. And that's just an example, but, it would prevent the developer from, clear cutting everything and just say, I'll just plant back little bitty trees in place of it. So it gives him some incentive to save the trees in, maybe wider than if it's a 20-foot buffer, maybe he's willing to save 40 feet of trees to get credit and not have to plant back 400 trees. I mean, there's certain that they will have to plant back because of landscaping
Yeah,
requirements.
Or maybe even get away with some smaller caliper trees in some spots, or,
I'm
some
gonna make
mix thereof.
That was my question that I had for you, like, when you're taking out big trees, I don't understand, still, why you put big trees back in place. Why would you leave those trees there in the first place?
I would think because the developer would need to grade certain areas of the site to be able to develop the type of building and they wanted to get in there, so like a Publix is a certain footprint, so you need to grade a certain area to fit that in there and, have that parking, reasonably flat parking lot in front that would require a lot of grading.
So I just want to ask the board this specifically, like, so do you see trees? Like large trees coming down and large and tall trees going right back up?
No.
Just smaller trees?
Yeah, most places I've worked in, if, you cut down a 20-inch tree, they're replacing it with, it may be 2.5-inch trees or something like that. But then they would get, in some places, they get credit for the trees they leave. So if they're required a 20-foot buffer, sometimes they'll leave a 30-foot to keep from having to plant so many trees back.
One of the points I want to make, a 4-inch is not a standard nursery stock that's easy to get in North Carolina at all. That's probably on some of these species that are street trees, 7 or 8 years old, and those nurseries can turn that in 2 or 3 years and sell 2.5-inch. So if you've got a development that's going into final construction in the middle of the summer, your survivability on a 4-inch tree is going to be less than 30%. So does Roseville have a process to go back and say at the end of the year, you've got to replace that, and what do you do? And if you have large trees in small spots, it becomes more difficult. So one of the reasons a lot of them are still staying with smaller is you just have a much greater survivability
Sure.
on that. So, 2.5 is pretty easy to get. 3 is pretty easy to get. 4,
Not so much.
it's exponentially harder each time it goes up to a different size.
Okay.
And especially evergreens. They're going to be not graded in 4-inch, they're going to be graded in feet
Right.
on that. So, on that, but
Right.
yeah, instead of that, you're going to have root balls and so forth, but you need 1 foot of root ball for every inch of caliper. So a 4-inch tree's got a 4-foot root ball that weighs 1,200 pounds. So getting those in some of these small islands or something after the fact to replace, could be a tough thing to do. It's just on there from a practical standpoint. So instead of 4, perhaps do the ratio, but say it could be a combination of anything to get to there.
Okay.
But
Allow
keep
some
your total
flexibility.
caliper inch for the development at this 4 or what have you, but say from 2.5 to 4. And then that architect has to figure out, well, can I put 10 4-inch? And the contractor has to say, well, I can find 10 4-inch and then have, when they get to buy them, because you're approving this and the landscape is almost the last thing that goes in lots of these. You're several years in, they can't find it. Can you go back and adjust that to say instead of that, I'll put 22-inch?
We could certainly incorporate some flexibility to account for supply chain. I know there are definitely supply chain issues now, and who knows how long that will go on for.
Yeah. Well, the nurseries around North Carolina have not caught up to what happened after 2008. They were pushing. If anybody ever goes past Morris Pond Road and looked at the nursery that was right there at the end of where the bypass is, he pushed everything over in 2010 and 11 because he couldn't sell it. And once it gets too big, the spades they have to dig them out of the ground, if you don't get that size right, the tree was not going to survive very well. So they couldn't sell them, so they just pushed them over on that and replanted.
The reason why the big transplant business never caught on around here?
Well, there was a guy that used to do it, and then he died, and it's just a very expensive. So each one of those spades, the biggest you can transport is about an 8-foot tree, or 8-inch root ball, 8-foot root ball, 8-foot tree. That's about a 8,000-pound piece. It's just hard. That's probably a 15 or 20-year-old tree. So a nursery's planting, it's like floor space.
Well,
Yeah.
I've seen other places where maybe locally, somebody set up a tree donation program. They've got a big tree, it's in the exact wrong spot, and somebody else is looking for a big tree, and they're willing to spend the money for the big heavy loader with the hydraulic spade to come in and grab it and move it and have an arborist tend the root ball when it goes in, so it stands a decent chance of
Well,
living.
I did it on my house over here. I moved some stuff like that. They're big 8-footers. And, it's pretty amazing how big they are now. I didn't want to wait. So, but it's very expensive. And you got to have, if it's an 8-foot root ball, you have to have about 15 feet because these pieces that come down have to spread out. You have to be able to tilt it. You can't move these things in the middle of the summer.
Yep.
If it's a deciduous tree, without a lot of risk and you can spray some anti-desiccant and stuff on it to keep it, but it's just really not. I mean, if you did it in the last 2 weeks with this stuff, your survivability is going to go, way, way down. It's just the stress factor here in North Carolina. So, does the ordinance allow for a bonding out if they can't do it at time of closing into the right season?
We could push it to the right season.
Yeah, if you could do that, I think, and those things would be great on there.
Yeah, it's, like you said, this is not a great time.
Yeah, but your suggestion, if they could find it on site, so when McKinley Mill was built over off of Wake Crossroads, the developer did that. They moved a ton of trees on site around out into the front that were there, just exactly what you're talking about. And I was involved with that process, and that worked pretty well. But it's just, for a long time, nobody had that. Nobody was selling any landscape from 2008 to like 12, so lots of nurseries never caught up, and then it took off, and they just still can't plant enough.
So to be clear, you're saying keep the trees and put them elsewhere, move them around, right?
It's an option, yeah.
Item 10, I don't know if you all have met Eddie Henderson. It's one of JG's new staff people. He's great, and he has a background in horticulture, and he's been jumping into the LDO with us, and he made what I thought was a great suggestion that we've included in this round. He is working on, we don't have it yet, he's working on a suggested plant list that will focus on native and locally adaptive species. And we would like to include in the LDO that when you're creating your landscape plan and plant list, that it would include at least 4 different plant species with no one being greater than 35% of the palette. So you won't see just only red maples and willow oaks in a subdivision.
No more of the parking lot oaks?
Oaks are fantastic.
No, oaks
Yeah,
are good, but
sometimes-
that specific
Yeah,
kind
there's
that
they're all the
that
same.
does
They're all the same.
decent around the parking lots, what seems to be really, really common around here.
Because that's what you can buy that will survive.
Yeah.
So the maples have been taken off of the list around Raleigh because they've got this situation called, it's a mold and a mite on these.
The little holes in the leaves?
Yes, but this, maples are a bottom species, and everybody says, let's put it up here because it goes good. And once it gets in an urban environment along that, they start having these problems on there with this scale and this mite insect. So that's one. But NC State is teaching the horticulture now is biodiversity. And biodiversity is what I think the language that your person is doing. And that's exactly what he says. Don't put one species, put enough so that if there's problems. One of the other things that would be nice to do that I see a lot is these ordinance would say at time of planting, this plant needs to be a certain height. Well, that's a big problem because a lot of the evergreens that grow to that height, the landscaper or that architect is going to put, it could be any of these, the ones that grow fast in the container also grow fast in the ground. And so when you talk about sustainability, they put stuff like ligustrums and hollies, but then every parking lot owner wants to keep those things down at 2 or 3 feet because they don't want to block their signage. They don't want to block that. But, typically what I've been told by planners is we don't want to see visual clutter. So these pieces in there, well, what happens is they end up growing high. Then the police doesn't like it because
Can hide
it's there. So there probably needs to be some look into that, because the ones that grow fast also are the ones that require more pruning and more work, and then more landfill and more, those type of things. So I'm seeing in states out of North Carolina allowance for more native grasses and more perennials instead of just evergreens. So pockets of those things that still can be pretty and they still can function as a buffer, because if you ride around, and I know you were from Cary, I just said everything's vanilla. Every parking lot has exactly the same tree and all the same bushes all pruned there. And the towns that start to have some different look are ones that allow for some different pieces instead of just evergreens. But maybe part of this that says, you can get a credit if you put in native, like black-eyed Susans, or some coneflowers or some grasses. North Carolina does have a tremendous amount of things that you can buy, and there are a number of big native nurseries that grow this stuff, but we're not using it because it always says evergreen. So perhaps it doesn't have to be evergreen on every spot of it on there. But now if you go and you look, just start looking the next few days, you'll see everybody's got the same green strip in front. And unless you plant annuals, nobody has anything different. And annuals require extra water. But a lot of these native grasses, you can see really pretty looking stuff, especially if you do any lead buildings, the landscape, where it's the sustainability. So I think if some of this language, if it could, this is great start, but if there's any way he can include any of that.
Sure. I think some of the
on
grasses
there.
look fantastic. I've seen them.
Yeah, that's a more progressive look and a more contemporary look, and it serves the same purpose as carbon exchange as some of the evergreens, and especially if you say you got to prune these evergreens, because what we consider dwarf, everybody wants 2 to 3 foot. There's probably 10 species that stay that small, and none of them are really well adapted for urban highway kind of spots. So the stuff that everybody buys, the needlepoint hollies and ligustrums, they won't get to 6 to 8. That means you got to prune them 2 or 3 times a year. So we're not really doing a lot, and from sustainability long run, if we keep allowing some of that on there. But just my soapbox.
Sure. Good stuff. One thing that's come up with the town board, I can't remember if we have talked about it much, are different foundation types. This is an image of a traditional crawl space foundation. And then on this slide, on the left side, it's a slab on grade construction. And on the right, it is a stem wall. And several of the planning staff and a town manager were out in the field. We met with the Wake County building inspector because we were trying to learn about what a stem wall was. And it's, if I'm understanding correctly, it's more how something is built. And it seems to be the preference in our community is the crawl space appearance versus the slab on grade appearance. And for a stem wall, we'd like to include in the LDO that it has to be at least 18 inches high. This one, I'm not sure how tall it is, but if you had something that was a little taller, 18 inches high would be about 3 steps up to the front door. And that would give this kind of look versus the look on the left. Do you all have any thoughts or input on foundations?
So we're going to proposing to just eliminate slab on grades altogether?
I would say no, because sometimes those are needed in certain kinds of communities. I know my mom and dad live in a 55-plus community in Wake Forest, and their home is a slab on grade, so they don't have to step up into anything.
So what would be the procedure for someone to utilize a slab on grade? Would it be like a special use permit to do slab on grades, or as a condition of approval?
You know what? I am not sure. That's something we'll have to certainly figure out and define, because people will want to know. And if you have a suggestion on that, we'll gladly take it.
I have to think about it.
I think I don't know if I discussed this with you before. I'm not sure if it was you or somebody up there. If you could just explain to me, because I know I keep bringing this up on the board, because there's one neighborhood off of
Averett?
West Young Street, Avery
Oh.
Road. It seems like everything is built, on, the stem wall. What is, and, somebody said, I think somebody said it's kind of expensive to do it, more expensive than a slab sometimes, I don't know. That really wasn't my concern, because I'm not paying for it, obviously. But the appearance of that, what differentiates that? Why is it better than the other? Because when you go to that particular neighborhood, as a real estate broker, I keep clients back there. Aesthetically, it does not look that pleasing. It looks a little worrisome because it's so flat and level to the ground. But I know they build under it to help with the possibility of flooding the front porch, which is even with the ground. I just personally, when this comes back around to us, I just need to be more educated on it. What is the benefit to it?
I mean, I think, in my opinion, I mean, a slab and a stem wall are pretty similar, and I think pretty similarly, probably the stem wall costs a little more because basically it's just an elevated slab. It's still the same ultimate construction. You just got more of an exposed foundation that elevates your slab up, and it's just for aesthetics and personal preference. And, you know, some people don't want a pure slab on grade, and some people do. I think it's more of aesthetics and what your personal preference is. And both of those are cheaper than a crawl space, I believe.
I think it was what you said.
Yeah, the biggest argument for slab on grade in some situations is, you know, the one Meredith brought up is accessibility. It's a lot easier to design a slab on grade house for wheelchair use than to, if you're going to meet all the slope requirements for a ramp, some of those ramps can get pretty long, and then whoever's in the chair has to get that chair up the ramp on top of it. That becomes a problem.
The one on the left, what is the one on the left there?
The one on the left is a slab on grade.
Okay, so the ones that are in that particular development, they look just like it's a slab on grade as well. So where does the 18 inches start? At the lowest point, up 18?
I don't think she's showing one with the 18-inch.
No,
but-
I'm not. This is,
No, I'm
Yeah.
not asking. Like, where
Yeah, I mean, basically the one on the left, if you did a stem wall with 18-inch exposure, you would, instead of just walking straight into the front door, you'd have 3 steps up to it. So you'd be building a foundation, filling it with gravel or dirt, and then pouring the slab on that. So you're just elevating that slab and building steps up into it just to give it a different appearance. So it would be the exact same house. It would just be a different appearance of it.
Can I ask a question? Is the stem wall have to have any special treatment like a masonry veneer or a brick, veneer? It
We need
does,
to
it
have
can't
some
be
kind
just
of-
left as straight.
right, the rendering on the top right shows the same home that's in the picture on the bottom right, and it has the stone veneer.
So as a compromise, could it be that a certain percentage of the house has to have, if it's 18-inch stem wall, that would still allow for potentially a front door or a driveway to have it at grade so it could be accessible, but then the rest of it could be graded off and, you could have 25% that's not 18 inches, and then that would allow for, some compromise there with accessibility, or a driveway that's there or something versus,
I think you'd probably get a lot of opposition from the developers at that point in time, because then instead of grading a flat pad to either build a stem wall or build a slab onto, you're grading basically a stepped pad at that point in time, stepping up one side higher than the other. So it's a lot more grading. In my opinion, if you didn't want to have a neighborhood with all slab on grades, maybe put a percentage of, 20% of the neighborhood can be slab on grade, or 30, come up with a number of what you're what you're comfortable with. But to me, it's more of a personal preference. Some people are going to like them, some people aren't. Just like,
Ask you to take a trip out to that neighborhood and tell me what you see, because I was told they were all stem.
Yeah, you're
And-
referring to Chandler's Ridge, right by the cemetery?
Go further down to the left. Those seem to be as well,
Elizabeth Springs,
The salesperson, yes,
all the way at the end.
all the way down to the left.
And they could still be stem walls depending on the slope of the lot, because the front of the lot could be at grade and then the back slopes off. And if it's got a foundation at the back, it could still be a stem wall construction, just at grade at the front. So there's a lot of different
Yeah, I mean,
possibilities.
I've seen walkout basement houses that look like they're slab on grade from the street, but you go out back and there's another
basement.
full story. It just, the topography drops off that fast.
I would just like to see if you could, I don't know, I'm sure you're probably busy, but it's holding me back because the entire neighborhood is built that way, but it doesn't seem, and sometimes you can't tell just looking visually if something is really sloping, but if you look at the entire neighborhood.
It depends on what part of the country you come from also. If you're from Florida or Texas, there's tons of slab on grade. That's all there is. There's no,
Yeah.
you come from up north, you got crawl spaces and basements, you know, and so different parts of the country have different preferences. And I think people are comfortable with people moving in from different parts of the country with different construction techniques.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of a personal opinion, you know. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the sales of the neighborhood would probably prove that somebody likes them.
Right, it is, that's what I'm saying, but I want to be more educated on when it comes to that time to vote, because I really don't see it visually. Aesthetically, it doesn't look that nice to me, but that's just my opinion, but I just want to know what is the benefit to one or the other.
I was in Wendell Falls the other day, and the Ashton Woods part of that, there must be 200 in a row that are all slab on grade, and they look really nice. I mean, they've landscaped around them nice. They have some stone, you know, like these, some veneer up higher or whatnot. And, you know, it's not my personal preference, but it still was an attractive neighborhood
Yeah,
with
no,
this, with that.
I tend to agree personally. I wouldn't want to live in a neighborhood that was all slab on grade. But with that said, I've also pushed a wheelchair up an 8 or 10-foot ramp.
If we're talking affordability, I'm not a builder, but I think slab on grade can be less expensive than certain crawl space and grading. Is that,
They're a little bit less expensive to construct, but what I've been told from some of the tract builders and national builders is the fixed cost. You know, they know when they come in a graded pad, they know what their cost is going to be. When you've got a sloped lot and you've got to build you know, a crawl space foundation, you know, you could have two lots side by side, one flat and one sloped, and your foundation cost could be twice as much on one versus the other. So
it does
the
go to
national builders
affordability.
like that fixed cost. They know foundation's going to cost this on every lot. And so they can, that's one of the ways they keep their cost, and they can build the same house and sell it for the same thing on every lot.
So I think the question in here, though, is define acceptable foundation types such as stem walls and crawl spaces. I mean, can we just add the slab to it, or, I mean, and I guess, I'm not sure, what is the LDO saying right now?
It doesn't say anything. This has come about because we have several, I guess they're going to come more now with rezoning cases. In the past, they've been with the special use permits. We have several special use permits with the condition to have all homes with a stem wall or crawl space. And we don't have a definition of what, you know, a stem wall height. And I think when that condition was made, I think our town board thought that both would look very similar, and they don't. So we're looking for some definition, like that 18 inches or something, if you're making that condition for the stem wall, that it would have a certain height.
And there to keep in mind that 18-inch was not based on any fact, it was just a number
Right.
that somebody said, so that may not even make sense either in this conversation.
It's, a step
So that's
is,
why we need to be educated.
They're probably trying to
a
get
step
enough
is usually
height.
6 inches. A typical step is 6 inches up, so there would be three steps up, which I think looks reasonable.
Okay.
Item 12 is very straightforward. It's typical and reasonable and normal to have a statement in your ordinance that the land development administrator will make general interpretations. And right now, in our LDO, it only says the land development administrator has use interpretation. So I'd like to put that in. And then the last two items are inquiries from the development community. And what I'm looking for from you is just an initial reaction to housing types that we don't have a slot to put them in right now on our LDO. First, the inquiry for this one, they called them Charleston-style homes or zero lot line homes. And zero lot line means there's only a setback on one side, and zero lot line means you're built right up to the property line. So the property line, let's see if I can do the magical pointer options. Did it work? No, I was trying. Okay, so we can see my cursor or the mouse arrow. This is the property line, and this is the property line. You can see the home is built up to the property line. So I'm just looking for a reaction. Is this a housing type that you would want to see in Rolesville? It's like a more narrow, single-family home.
What happens if you got the 10-foot, that's, you can get accessibility for equipment, but if you need to do work on the other side of your house and your neighbors put a fence right up to the lot line on the back?
Guess you have to go through the alley
Yeah.
or this.
Typically, there would be a,
On the side, how
Oh,
do
on
they
side.
get to a work on that?
I am
typically
not
there'd be
sure.
like a 3-foot maintenance easement, and you wouldn't be allowed to, or if you did fence, you wouldn't be able to fence right up to it usually.
So we need to make sure the amendment has that.
Well,
Yeah.
and a lot of the times, if you put a fence up, you end up losing your driveway. I stayed in one briefly in another state, and yeah, that open side was where the driveway went halfway back, and then it was the heat pump and the little bit of a backyard. So if you tried to put a fence up between the two houses, somebody was losing parking space.
Would this be considered like a cluster development?
It depends on how it's laid out and how much open space would be preserved in the subdivision layout. I think of the cluster as more, these are obviously smaller lots. Maybe it needs to be, and if you get to do this type of product, you have to have the same amount of open space as you would in a cluster development.
This would be a mixture or a variety of different products, correct? It's not just all Charleston-style homes that we're thinking of,
It
or?
would depend, actually, the developer who's interested in this product is looking at doing what I would consider somewhat of an infill project. That means there are homes either already developed or planned right around their piece of property, so they're filling in and connecting to other homes. So it might feel like it's part of something else, but in their particular development, they're interested in doing
Yeah,
just
it's not a
this.
standalone product. That's why it has to
Okay.
have, so if you go over to 5401, I've driven
Yeah.
through there before, and I've seen this type of product before. It looks nice. It really does. It's quite appealing, but it does cater to, I guess, that's the word I'm looking for, just a little bit of diversity in what people are looking for. I know it's not a product for me, but it doesn't mean it's not a product for someone else, which is perfectly fine. So, and then there's commercial, there's businesses right within walking distance. So in that enclosed community, it works. Here in Roseville, you'd have to probably build something like that. I don't know if there's anywhere that's existing just yet. Hopefully, the future may bring about those kind of developments. So from a personal standpoint, it's not for me, but I'm open to the idea if there's a lot of commercial activity to support it.
Okay.
I don't think I'm opposed to it either. I look at it also, the size of the houses as a possible alternative to some of the townhomes, because you're
Alternative.
looking at the units similar size to a townhome, but they're just detached from each other, so it gives you still that single-family feel. And I think we just need to find a place for it in the UDO, but it could be another alternative means, and it might help offset some of the demand for townhomes, because that seems to be a lot of people coming up for townhomes and the affordability, and this might just get us another category of houses without that big block of townhomes in each neighborhood.
I think it needs to be limited, though, to residential high, not residential medium, because then someone could try to cram a whole bunch of them into there. And I listened to I was on a neighborhood meeting with Toll,
Okay.
a phone call, and that's what they're going to try to do with the 600 homes over on Burlington Mill Road on that development. And they've got, out of 224 acres, only 90 acres they've got 120 acres of developable space. It's got that many wetland and stone issues, and they want to put all cluster homes real tight
That's
on a
the
residential medium.
Tom's Creek neighborhood you're talking
Yep,
about? Yeah.
yep.
But offset to that is you're preserving a lot of space.
Unusable, it's not open,
Well-
and they couldn't tell us what's open and versus, what do they call that, passive versus actually active on there. It's in the swamp. That's a swamp down in the bottom. That's not usable space for anybody on lots of that in the bottom. Lots of the other that's up higher is rock.
Have we had anybody interested in developing that? Have we ever had a developer ask about those?
Just one so far since I've been here, and that's why I brought this
Right.
forward. Just, I said I would get a reaction from the planning board and the town board.
I think Traditions in Wake Forest has a section of these style houses.
There's several in Heritage that has this style,
Yeah.
and they look nice too.
Okay. And one more thing for you all to look at, please. This is another developer inquiry. Thought it was an interesting product. This is what is called middle market senior housing. And it's a combination of a multifamily building and some cottages. And it doesn't fit with our multifamily because the density is higher than what our residential high multifamily allows. That our residential high has a density cap of 12 units per acre. And this multifamily building is about 16 units per acre. And I guess the combination of the building plus the cottages is about 16 units per acre. And it doesn't fit in with our assisted living, integrated living facilities, continuing care definition because it doesn't have the health services. What it has is what the developer calls à la carte services. So if you're a senior living in this building, you could have arrangements to have your laundry done and food delivered and different things happening, but there's no health care. And here is a rendering of what the neighborhood might look like from the cottage green looking with the multifamily building in the back. So it's a different combo. Just wanted to see what kind of reaction you all had to this.
Are they saying they couldn't make it work with 12 units per acre? Or
That's what they said.
I was thinking when the UDO was originally, where it was adopted, or the LDO was adopted, that there was a lot of discussion about that density in that high density district, or limiting it to 12 and not going to, it seemed like it was originally proposed at more like 16 and it was decided to come back at 12. My initial thought is they could possibly make it work at 12 units per acre. That's what the rule is.
Good feedback. And well, that concludes the presentation. So I'll look forward to bringing all of this back to you in more detail at your July meeting.
Thank you. On to communications
Yes.
and planning director's report.
So you have your development report in your packet. Wanted to just share a few highlights on some of the developments. We've gotten some questions recently under residential developments. I've had some questions from the community on the A Master Team townhomes. And I know there are some scheduling issues with the contractor for that one, so that development's on hold at the moment. Chandler's Ridge is going strong. Let's see, we think Preserve at Moody Farm, you all saw that rezoning. We expect that preliminary plat to come through sometime soon. And the towns at Carlton Point, that'll be moving forward. You'll see those townhomes being built soon. Their final plat has been approved. And Walbrook will be coming along as well. And just one other item I wanted to share with you all, James Carter, Planner One, his last day with us was Friday, June 10th. He accepted a job as a transit planner with Go Triangle, and his passion lies in transit planning. So he said he really appreciated the opportunity here, but I just thought you might wonder where he went, so. And that is all I have this evening. Regency Heritage is the one that is, a lot of it's in Wake Forest and other parts in Rolesville, it's sort of in the
Across from
northwestern.
Heritage High School. Forestville. Just past Stonewall.
There's just so many of them, sometimes you just forget which ones.
Could you remind me of where the A-Master Team Townhouse was?
It is just down Main Street near the CVS at the corner of Main and Rogers, the little it's behind the Coffee Lodge.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Town Attorney's Report. Going into next item, any other business? Not hearing any. The last item for the evening would be adjournment, if there's a motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion for adjournment. Is there a second? I'll second. That was a little slow. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify with an aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you once again, everybody. And congratulations for James.